Well, good evening, Brennan, and welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337. This is our 27th Zoom meeting as part of our lockdown lecture series, and it's a great privilege this evening to welcome you all along on behalf of all the members of the Lodge. As usual, I'll start with the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidance. I can ask you all to ensure that your video cameras are on and that you have a name that is recognised by myself, to make sure that we've got no cows or eavesdroppers coming in just now. I will remind you that it is being recorded and it will be placed live in our YouTube channel later on this evening. If you have any questions for our speaker this evening, please put them in the chat and we will have a moderated question and answer session after the meeting. So with much pleasure, it gives me a great delight to welcome back to the Lockdown Lecture Series Brother Mike Hearn. He's a past master of our sister research lodge, Felix, up in Aberdeenshire. And he's here this evening to talk to us about the first Freemasonry in the Navy and seaborne lodges. So over to you, Brother Mike.
Right, I'll just share the screen. I've got it up on my screen.
You should be able to.
Yeah, share.
Is that coming up yet, Mike? Or... Yeah, here we go.
Is that there? Can you see it?
It's coming up, Mike. Yeah, it started sharing screen. Not quite there yet. You'll need to feed your mouse. Galloway cheddar's always good. Keep them running round and round.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. You should be on mute, Bassmaster Turton.
I've got Zoom meeting not responding, Gordon.
Okay. We stop participant sharing. Right. Mike, can I suggest that you leave and come back in?
Yeah, okay.
And there you go, Mike. Thank you.
Right. Right, okay. It's as early as 1741, sorry, 49 minutes exists of a lodge that met twice on the Royal Navy Man of War. And this talk looks at Royal Navy Men of War. This talk will document the existence of other shipboard lodge meetings and lodges of instruction that met and continue to meet today. Additionally, I'll be talking about Masonic banquets abroad. Cruise liners will also be mentioned. Now, before we set the scene, we must look at the military lodges, the four categories of naval lodges that we'll look at, and warranted sea lodges going today, as well as some questions and answers. Military lodges, as we know, weren't confined.
He's gone again, Gordon.
Yeah. Okay, Brian. I think what I'm going to do is we will reschedule Mike for another evening, and what I thought would have to happen is you might just have to put up with me and another presentation I've always kept in reserve. But if you can just, I'm going to unmute you all, Brian, and if you can talk with yourselves for a couple of minutes. Okay, back to you, Michael.
Right. The military lodges, as we know, possessed ambulatory or travelling warrants. And this meant that a lodge would meet with its regiment, or it would also with its ship. And those meetings actually took place for military in the army, in the cantonment garrison, or in the navy on board or adjacent to ship, Freemasonry around the world. And of the home constitutions, there was something like 352 travelling warrants pre-union, and post-union 419. The figures that I have in addition to that was that there was a total of 561 warrants that were in actual fact issued to the military. But in latter years, there were a number of reductions. So we have to ask ourselves why this occurred. And a lot of the reasons for that was the emergence of the Orange Order into the army into the early 1800s. The Orange Order was deemed counter to the rules of service, as it was seen as a political organisation, and commanders-in-chief actually ordered those particular Masonic lodges closed. Sadly, there was a number of misinterpretations by commanding officers of regiments, and they did in actual fact close a lot of lodges down. Today, there are two active lodges. The St John's Lodge, number 295, Irish Constitution, that still meets, say, with its regiment. And also Lodge Glittering Star, number 322, which currently meets and exercises its warrant, travelling warrant, in and around the Midlands. Now, on board ship, we look at four categories of shipboard lodge meetings. We have occasional meetings. In other words, they occurred once or twice. We have warranted meetings where a Grand Lodge actually gave a warrant or a charter for lodge meetings to occur. We also have lodges of instruction and also other meetings, be they Masonic banquets, funerals, chivalrous acts, etc. Now, it was on the 24th in New Hampshire, the Provincial Grand Lodge of New Hampshire, which was constituted by the Grand Lodge of England and Moderns. And the minutes of the lodge held that they held a meeting on board one of the warships under construction by the Royal Navy, and that was HMS America. She was a 44-gun man of war and a frigate, and she was being built in the local shipyard in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The first recorded minutes of the meeting, and here they are. One page, brethren, a note to all secretaries there, probably written in candlelight, but nevertheless it gives a register of all the brethren attending and a brief summary about the work. And it was held on board the America, Thursday, the 26th of October, 1749. The second meeting was held on Monday, the 1st of December, 1949, and from 1751 onwards, the lodge actually met ashore in a local tavern. Between 1757 and 58, 7 newly admitted brethren of the third lodge in Sweden, Lodge Salomon à Trois Storage at Gothenburg, were employed by the Swedish East India Company, and they sought permission in 1758 to hold lodge meetings away from home. So the brethren of that lodge wanted to encourage the enthusiasm, and they granted a warrant of constitution to the 7 brethren to enable them to hold meetings in the East Indies or whenever they came ashore. And the minutes of the Salomon Lodge detail that the eldest daughter voyaging to Canton with the Swedish East Indian ships, and the lodge was called the Prince Carl Lodge, and that was named after the ship they sailed in. Before the Prince Carl visited Canton, the brethren held a meeting at their first port of call, which was Cadiz, and there 4 Swedish men on the naval ship's berth there applied for initiation into the lodge and were duly balloted for and initiated. Minutes of 2 meetings exist, but are singed around the edges, indicating that other records may have been lost due to fire damage. Minutes do not exist to confirm that lodge meetings took place aboard the Prince Carl itself. In 1811, it is reported that Admiral Brown held a lodge meeting on board HMS Hercules. The man of war was at anchor at the time of the meeting. Moving forward, brethren, in 1992, the Knox Military Lodge of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, which was consecrated on the USS Constellation, which was moored in the Charleston Naval Yard. And most importantly, brethren, the actual ship itself is very similar build to HMS Victory, but this one does go to sea on a regular basis. It is manned by US Navy personnel, whereas the HMS Victory does not. She is in actual fact dry docked and currently undergoing renovation now. Moving on to the 8th of August 1942, and we've heard previous talks about this, was an emergency meeting of Lodge Star in the East, number 6480, Scottish Constitution. That took place on the merchant ship Gripsholm, and here she is. She was a repatriation ship, and she was full of internees from Japan. And the ship was en route to San Francisco. And it just so happens that the minute books, effects, and all the other lodge equipment was in possession of the secretary, C. Rodriguez Jimenez. There he is there. He was a diplomat at the time with the Venezuelan embassy. And these were sealed in his room by the authorities at his residence as he was secretary of the lodge, because he had diplomatic immunity, being the Consul General for Venezuela in Japan. All this documentation was later repatriated and sent to the Grand Lodge of Scotland via the Grand Lodge of the District Grand Lodge of Columbia. Amongst the passengers we see were 7 brethren, besides were the Right Worshipful Master and 7 lodge members. Now they held a meeting at 3 o'clock on board the Gripsholm, and an affidavit was later sworn by the Master and 5 brethren on the 10th of August 1942 in the US Consulate in Rio de Janeiro to confirm that the minutes were recorded. This meeting was in actual fact a table meeting. They didn't have a warrant or charter, but there happened to be, I believe, a Deputy District Grand Master, and he gave authority for the meeting to in actual fact take place. We also have details of a lodge Savark that meetings took place on board vessels moored alongside wharves, and preliminary start of the Masonic lodges are in Indonesia and also Sawark. Now we now move on to the early warranted meetings. We don't have any information to infer that the Irish or Scottish lodges constitutions actually had lodges that met on board ship or at sea. It is, however, recorded and documented that the English constitution did. They warranted 5 regular lodges to meet on board men of war in the Royal Navy, and these were called Blue Water lodges. And Brother Thomas Dunkley, who we know about, is thought to have been responsible for 3 of them. We don't have any evidence that Dunkley was responsible for the instigation of the remaining 2 lodges. Now, Dunkley was 29 years old when he was initiated on the 10th of January 1754 into a lodge that met in the 3 Tons Tavern. It was called the 3 Tons Lodge, based in Plymouth, and the lodge had many naval officers amongst it, and Dunkley was serving on board HMS Tiger at the time of his initiation. He had joined the Royal Navy as a boy seaman at the age of 10, later becoming a non-commissioned officer with the rank of gunner. He was also a teacher of mathematics and possessed a patent from the Grand Lodge of England under the Moderns, authorising him to inspect the craft wherever he might go. He also held a warrant number 254, dated the 16th of January 1760, permitting him to hold a lodge on board HMS Vanguard and to make masons. But in order to do that, brethren, he had to first of all apply to the captain to get permission to hold a lodge meeting, because where brethren would gather in secret, there was always the sad prospect that the word mutiny was mentioned, and that was always dealt with by the most severest of punishments. So it helped if your captain was in actual fact a Freemason. It also meant that the ship's routine was actually put out of action. And as we know, that we have a document here, which is a certificate, the forerunner of the Pillar certificate, which was given to a Brother Gray. A copy of this is in the Museum and Library of Freemasonry in London, and the actual original resides in the library in Montreal in Quebec. Looking at the lodges themselves, the first was HMS Vanguard, which Dunkley was a gunner in 1760. Today, that lodge is now the London Lodge, number 100. It actually has a threshold or number on members that it will, in actual fact, admit. And that, I have been advised, is a result of the number of masons that could, in actual fact, be fitted in the wardrobe. The second
I think we've lost them again, Brian, if you just bear with us.
Very good.
Are you back with us, Mike?
We're back here, are we, brethren?
Yep, we can hear you
I've
again,
spoken
Mike.
about the actual certificate, Brother Gray's Vanguard certificate. So to speak, because further research has been done on him, and this was done by Dr. Suzanne Summers. She's the professor of history at St. Vincent College in Pennsylvania. In 2015, she presented a Sankey lecture on her findings, The Masonic Empire of Thomas Dunkley, which I actually YouTube site. She also lectured at QCC Lodge on London on her findings, and she was also responsible for writing the book, Thomas Dunkley and English Freemasonry. Was he really a royal? Well, the question of that was answered by her, and it was apparently not so. Because what she did was she located his baptismal certificate, which firmly stated that his father was Adam Dunkley in that respect. But like everybody, we all like a hero, and Thomas Dunkley was everybody's to say hero at the time. But sadly, it was in actual fact a very, very elaborate ruse. But he did in actual fact get a grace and favour apartment in Somerset House on that, and he was able to live a relatively comfortable life. But also he did a terrific amount for Freemasonry. We must also remember that in 1810, during the war between Britain and France, a number of French prisoners were transferred and interred on board hulks that were moored in Portsmouth Harbour. Masonry was very popular in the French army, as it was in the British, and an eyewitness account of a French officer details that he had attended a Masonic meeting on board one of the hulks. It was cramped. It was conducted in the cramped compartment in the forward part of the hulk. A single candle in an empty bottle was the only means of light. Each brother was proved before entry, and the master was the only one seated on a three-legged stool. A degree was worked and conferred, and afterwards a collection was taken to relieve the poor and distressed brethren in the hulk who were not in receipt of full rations. Such a story is really of a non-regular lodge meeting and has nothing to do with the English craft, but it does in actual fact demonstrate that Freemasonry was very important to prisoners of war at that particular time, and it also relieved their chief enemy, which at the time was in fact boredom. Interestingly, on Thursday the 7th of July 1910, the RMS Orvieto, a ship in the Orient Line, was hired out to the Provincial Grand Lodge of Essex, and they held a Provincial Grand Lodge meeting on board. We now come to a very interesting thing, which is lodges of instruction. And it was in 1927 that the Navy cruiser HMS Hawkins visited Shanghai. And there were 27 brethren aboard her in her ship's company. And to facilitate a Masonic outlet for these brethren, when ashore, they requested permission for the District Grand Master in Northern China, Right Worshipful Brother Clark, to appoint a preceptor and to hold rehearsals in the nearest Masonic hall. And so the Hawkins Lodge of Rehearsal was in actual fact formed. This gave brethren an opportunity to hire a local lodge room, enabling them to rehearse their ritual. The latter was learned during periods when they were on board ship and off watch. In late November 1928, the Hawkins Lodge of Rehearsal closed and the ship HMS Hawkins left the China station. But the success and popularity of the ensuring Hong Kong Lodge of the Hawkins Lodge of Rehearsal became widely known to brethren serving in other ships' companies of the China fleet, in that it provided a role model for what was to be used in the future, because in 1929 another request was made to the District Grand Master for permission to form a China Fleet Lodge of Rehearsal. The Book of Constitutions under the English Constitution at that particular time allowed Grand Lodge to sanction, under direct license, the formation of any sole lodge of instruction. Grand Secretary wrote on the 29th of May 1929 confirming this, and it resulted in the formation of the China Fleet Lodge of Instruction. August 1929 saw the District Grand Master in Weihai Wei, and this is Weihai Wei. This is the part of the naval base, and that there, brethren, is the lodge, is the Masonic Hall. The District Grand Master appointed 2 preceptors where the lodge was established, and the brethren of the Lodge of Instruction, when ashore at Weihai Wei Naval Base, hired the use of the lodge room of Daintree Lodge number 2938 under the English Constitution. Another preceptor was appointed in Shanghai, and if the fleet was at another location in China, a similar procedure would be followed if there was an English Constitution lodge that could afford similar facilities. Interestingly, provision was made for brethren of any ship attached to the Lodge of Instruction to hold meetings on board, but we don't have any details to confirm this in actual fact occurred. Weihai Wei was located in Shantung province in northeast China. It was a British leased territory. Whilst it was very small in size, only 285 square miles, its sole asset was a 6-mile wide harbour. The prospect of a new naval base began in 1898 when the authorities granted Britain a lease. In summer 1902, the resident brethren in Weihai Wei met and discussed the formation of a new lodge. Curiously, it transpired that there were sufficient members to form 2 lodges. So not only was the Daintree Lodge formed, and that was opened in a rented or converted old Chinese house on the 29th of January, but coincident was the opening of the King Edward VII Lodge, number 2937, on that same day. The brethren based there, given that this was the British naval fleet, had been strengthened, and it was indeed expected to grow further. They had formed both lodges in anticipation of this, but the proposed expansion didn't take place. In actual fact, the reverse happened. And between 1905 and 1906, the base was reduced in size. This curtailed the membership of the King Edward VIII Lodge, and by 1908, this lodge was erased after having been in abeyance for a number of years. Daintree Lodge, on the other hand, flourished, but never suffered the vicissitudes of the King Edward VII Lodge, but was strange event still in the light of their identical formation. And today, Daintree Lodge in fact meets in Otley in Hampshire under the Provincial Grand Lodge of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. This is the Masonic Hall today. Well, in 1998, you will note it's sporting a red star. Internally, not much has changed. This is a very old picture of the Daintree Lodge room taken in 1910. One can see and make out just the actual of the Daintree Lodge. This is a similar picture today there, and one can see that it is in actual fact laid out as a games room. Now, membership of this particular Fleet Lodge of Instruction was confined basically to military personnel associated with the China station. In other words, Royal Navy, Royal Marines, often RAF, Fleet Air Arm, and the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. And in August 1929, HM ships Cornwall, Suffolk, Hermes, Berwick, and Petersfield were stationed at Wehai Way, and this saw the formation of those branches in the China Fleet Lodge of Instruction. In 1931, HMS Cumberland arrived, and the Cumberland branch was formed. The work undertaken by the Fleet Lodge of Instruction was recognised by the District Grand Master for Northern China, who reported in 1932 that it was noted that it was the work done of the China Fleet Lodge of Instruction is of great benefit to the men who spend their time on the China station, improving their Freemasonry and keeping their minds occupied whilst away from home on something worthwhile. And certainly by 1933, there were branches working on board HM ships Kent, Cornwall, Cumberland, Medway, and Berwick. And over the ensuing years, these branches also met in various places like Yokohama, Kobe, Chifu, Wehai Way, Xiantou, Shanghai, Anklo, Hong Kong, and Penang. And in the summer season, the branches were based at Wehai Way, and winters were spent moored in Hong Kong. There was a continuous change of personnel, as HM ships were commissioned in service on the China station for only a period of 3 years. Besides the ritual, ceremonial elections were also learnt, and the Fleet Lodge of Instruction also participated in lodge meetings where vacancies for brethren had to be filled by visitors. They performed ritual and fulfilled the charitable aspects of Freemasonry. The brethren at Wehai Way also made donations to what was the then Northern China Masonic Charity Fund. The base closed and the China Fleet Lodge of Instruction closed back in November 1940, when the 32-year lease, which had been extended by 10 years, had ended with its retrocession to China. Additionally, the Japanese were keen to see the base vacated by the imperialist British. Also, one must be aware of that the Aegean Lodge of Instruction was formed during World War I, and that was associated by Phoenix Lodge, number 275, under the English Constitution in Portsmouth in Hampshire, which met on Lemnos Island, naval base in the Aegean. They did in actual fact make a set of working tools, and Phoenix Lodge, in their December meeting on an annual basis, does in actual fact get those particular working tools out and tell the story of them and how they in actual fact arrived. Of interest, we know, as far as we know, no formal or warranted Masonic activity has been associated with merchant navy ships and troop ships on board World War II. There is, however, occasional meetings of English Constitution lodges during World War II. But a number of those particular lodges under the English Constitution, when they returned home, they in actual fact swapped their travelling warrants or charters for stationary ones. We must also make reference to the Royal Mail paddle steamer Iona III, because there was a Masonic banquet held here on board in 1898 by Lodge Pin number 754. And certainly the records show that towards the end of 1897, a number of brethren in Argyll met for the purposes of forming a lodge in Lodge Gilpig Head, according to the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and they would petition for a warrant or charter, and Lodge Lock Fine, number 754, was opened. But as it was summer 1898, finding a suitable location for a consecration banquet due to the tourist season being in full swing was a bit of a problem. And one of the lodge members suggested that they use this particular ship, which they duly did. The Iona was used as it was berthed at Ardres Hague Pier, and where the banquet took place, the paddle steamer Iona remained in service until 1936, having been built in 1864, and was refitted on a number of occasions. Finally, of interest, brethren, we have a number of Masonic banquets that are in actual fact take place on board a number of liners. This here is the details of a Masonic banquet with all the brethren present, their names, ranks, and not quite serial numbers, but lodge numbers, and also their wise names, which took place on board the P&O ship Aurora. I understand that a number of Masonic banquets do in actual fact take place on these particular ships, and they staff there act as facilitators, but we don't have any record of any warranted lodge meetings. However, with the celebration of the tercentenary of the Grand Lodge of England in 2017, a warranted lodge meeting was in actual fact held on board a Masonic cruise ship with a warrant or charter, or the authority for the warrant of charter from one of the American state Grand Lodges, which was the Grand Lodge, I believe it was Grand Lodge in New Hampshire. And certainly records in actual fact exist and photographs exist of this. And finally, I must talk about warranted sea-going lodges today. St David's Lodge number 903 under the Irish Constitution in the province of Far East does in actual fact hold on occasions meetings of a motor yacht in Hong Kong waters. The lodge was constituted in 1992. Interestingly, this particular lodge has a number of Cathay Pacific pilots as members, and they, I understand, are looking at holding a meeting on board a jumbo jet whilst it's in flight. Whether or not they've done that, I simply don't know. I understand they've actually held meetings in England. I have suggested a meeting on board a carriage in the Bluebell Railway or some other preserved railway. I think they are in actual fact considering that. Another lodge close to home is Lodge de la Cité d'Europe, numero 10, number 1010, of the Grand Lodge National de France in the province of Flanders. This particular lodge was consecrated on the 11th of May 1996. It meets 5 times a year on a cross-channel ferry. It was at the time Sea France, but I understand it's now the My Ferry. And they also have a very interesting, as I say, meeting there, particularly when it's bobbing up and down. I visited it once many years ago, and slap bang in the middle of a double initiation. The ship was bouncing around. 2 blindfolded candidates who didn't quite fall around, but they were managed to maintain their composure and poise. But it's a very interesting meeting. The actual lodge itself goes back and forwards, and come 10:30, we were actually having our festive ball there. They get on board at around about 6 o'clock of the morning. It is very well attended with brethren not only from France but also from Belgium and Germany actually attending along. And to bring things up to date, we have a warranted lodge in London that actually meets on board a ship. This is the headquarters ship Wellington, situated in Victoria Embankment in London. And it's there that the Wellington Livery Masters Lodge, number 6991 under the English Constitution, actually meets on board. The ship is actually in trust for the Honourable Company of Master Mariners. I understand one of their particular requirements is that you have to be a member of a livery company in order to, in actual fact, join. It meets 5 times a year on that. I'm afraid I haven't been on board it yet because of the current pandemic, but nevertheless, say it's the opportunity will be there. As we in the English Constitution, particularly Craft and Chapter, are slowly getting back to having meetings again. Brethren, that in actual fact completes my talk, apart from a few hiccups, as I say, with the system, so to speak. But thank you all for your attention. And now for some questions and answers.
Michael, thank you so much, and thank you for persevering with your bandwidth and getting us through it and back on track. And Brennan, thank you also for your patience while we waited for Michael to come in and out. We do have some questions for you, Michael, in the chat room, and I think there's one clarification on one of your slides from one of our previous speakers when we were talking about the Irish military travelling lodges. I think you had it down as St John's when in actual fact it's St Patrick's, and I'm only saying that because I think there's some members from St Patrick's with us this evening. So
yes, my apologies for that faux pas.
Apart from that, the information was correct within it. We also have with us, I think, I'm sure I saw him joining us, the Provincial Grand Master from Argyll and Isles. And I think you may have set him a challenge to have some of his lodges, possibly Lodge Fine, take up the mantle again and have a meeting on the Seven Seas out in Argyll. So, Dougie, I don't know if you want to take that challenge up or not.
Having a number of island lodges, that would be one of our absolute endeavours to do during my commission, and I'll let you know, Gordon, and everybody present would be more than welcome to come along.
Brilliant.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, thank you very much for the invite.
Actually, one of our substitute provincial Grand Masters is he's a director on the Waverley. So once it's repaired, we're on board, boys.
Yes, I was on board her in Portsmouth many years ago, going a trip around the Isle of Wight.
Okay, so one of the comments is in the chat is from Dougie Filan. The knockers on the lodge door are from Brass of the Iona at Lodge 754. A comment from Bob Phillips. Fred Olsen cruise ships have informal Masonic meetings for Freemasons and record the members present. And if there's sufficient numbers, they assist to hold a buffet, the cost of which goes to the RNLI. Our brother secretary lives on what was Rosyth Naval Base, and he tells me that half of the Fred Olsen fleet is docked at Rosyth just now.
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. They don't have, if they're moored up, they don't have to pay mooring fees. It's similar with Southampton. So you'll find a lot of cruise ships are moored or either anchored either off the Weymouth area or off the Poole area.
No, they're not actually moored. They're actually in the dockyard.
They're actually in the dockyard, are they? Ah.
Okay, so lots of good comments about very interesting lecture. Many members, Brian attendance, they've attended meetings and banquets on a variety of ships from Queen Mary II, RMS Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria, as well as Britannia. No doubt that was our secretary again because he likes cruising, Brian. That's on the open seas, I would add. So again, no, I don't think there's any questions here for you this evening, Mike. But once again, on behalf of the members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, thank you for coming along and sharing with us your researches into Masonry on the high seas.
Well, thank you for the invite, Gordon. I mean, the actual lecture itself was read at the International Conference for History of Freemasonry in Edinburgh in 2009. So I like to think it has a good pedigree.
No, definitely, and it will make a good addition to our lockdown lecture series. Brethren, a couple of announcements. Next week we have a worshipful brother Barrett Epur, who is a past district deputy Grand Master in India. And he's going to come along and talk to us about the history of Freemasonry in India. He has, however, requested, due to the time zones, that we bring forward our meeting to 6 p.m. instead of 7 p.m. I know a lot of you are in the same category as Alistair Marshall and have the benefit of being retired. So that early hour hopefully will suit many of you. For those who are still working hard for a living, hopefully 6 o'clock's enough time for you to get in from work and join us. But if not, it will be available on the YouTube. So next week, Brian, it will be a 6 p.m. start for the history of Freemasonry in India. Tomorrow evening, Brian, the Grand Lodge of Scotland History and Heritage Group, their series of lectures on Scotland's oldest lodges will restart, and tomorrow evening we will hear the history of Lodge number 3, Scone in Perth. The Zoom details are available on a variety of Facebook pages, Brian, so we look forward to seeing you there tomorrow evening. Once again, Brother Mike Hearn, thank you very much for coming along this evening and taking part in our lockdown lecture series. Brian, thank you all for continuing the support to us. The conversation will always continue this evening on the Facebook pages, so if there's any other interesting points from the Matlows out there that they want to put up, please feel free to do so. It's not true that the Royal Air Force have taken over HMS Prince of Wales and Queen Elizabeth now that the dam busters are flying in and out of them, or soon to be. But with that, Brian, I will unmute you all. You can say your normal good evenings and thank yous to Mike, and then I'll close the meeting in a few minutes. Thank you, Brian.
Cheers very much, Mick. Thank you.
Thanks very much, well done, Mike. Excellent. Very much today. Very interesting.
Excellent,
Well done,
Mike. Thanks very much.
Well done, mate. Cheers, Gordon.
Well done, Michael.
Well done, Michael.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Michael,
Thanks,
Gordon,
you.
well done. Enjoy it.
Until next time.
Mike, that was very interesting. Thank you very much. And Gordon, thank you for arranging it.
Yeah, thanks again for everything, both to Mike and to Gordon for the organisation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Gordon. Take care, brother.
Well done, indeed. And well done, Gordon, again for setting everything up. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant, Gordon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent presentation, Michael, and thanks for that again, Gordon.
That's all right. Thank you.
All the best.
Cheers, Tom.
Well done, Mike. Good presentation. Enjoyed it.
Good.
And likewise from here, from BC, Canada, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, Ed.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Brian, the Matlows will be wanting to get away for their tot of rum, so I'll give you your 5 seconds countdown, and make sure it's not OVD, Brian, it's Pusser's rum this evening. I'll give you, there's Nobby showing you what it's like. Thank you, Brian. I'll give you 5, 4,
Well done, Michael.
3,
Well done.
Good night, everybody.
2,
Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
1.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you.